With the need for another army transport case thrust upon me, I decided to custom build one again, and I figured it might make for an interesting video. So without further ado, let's build a custom army transport and storage solution. Over my time with the hobby, I've experimented with many of the army transport solutions available, from GW's old stuff to their new stuff to the popular pre-cut foam trays. And ultimately, I have determined that a custom-built magnetic solution is the most useful and worthwhile in most scenarios. There are a few problems I have with foam trays. For one, they aren't as friendly for models with spiky or spindly bits, as they can often snag and suffer potential damage. For the models which are suitable, they will incur some wear over time as the foam rubs across the surface of the paint job, although this can be mitigated if you varnish your minis or if you are careful with your handling. There's also quite a bit of lost space due to the models being surrounded by the foam padding. And last but certainly not least is that foam trays do get pretty expensive. But interestingly enough, these four problems are not issues for custom-built magnet transport solutions. Take a look at my current build, which I use for my Slaanesh demons. Disclaimer, I'm not sponsored in any way by the Instapot, but hey, I won't say no if an offer was thrown my way. Since models aren't enclosed in any foam padding, there's nothing for any spiky or spindly bits to snag onto and potentially snap. It also means models won't suffer any abrasion over time as they are inserted/extracted for use. And with a bit of measuring, you can ensure your space is used to a pretty good degree. And finally, it's much cheaper compared to the equivalent amount of foam trays an army would require. Plus, it's a pretty fun puzzle to figure out. But that is not to say it's better in every possible circumstance. For instance, versus the elements, what is effectively a cardboard box isn't going to hold up as well, compared to a hard plastic shell or water-resistant pack. And against critical impacts, the protection it provides will be far inferior. Suffice to say, if I had to pick a transport box to throw my army down a flight of stairs, 10 out of 10 times I would pick foam trays. However, given how rarely I find myself walking through torrential downpours, and because critical impacts are few and far between, the custom-built magnet solution is vastly better for my hobby needs, which is typically to keep my army stored, because I gotta keep my boys dust-free, or to transport them to a location for a game. So with the whys defined, let's move on to the how-tos. The materials needed are a box to serve as your container. I prefer a cardboard box. Why? Because they are extremely versatile, and it reminds me of this old pearl of wisdom.
Getting the maximum use out of ordinary on-hand objects is the first principle of survival.
Ideally, you want a box that has a decent level of integrity and has dimensions to support the minis you would like to transport. Here I have a take-home dinner box, which I got from my local grocery store. It meets my requirements, and as a bonus, it has a handle built in. A steel sheet to create a magnet-friendly surface. I picked up this 24 by 24 inch sheet from my local hardware store for roughly $18. It's actually 22 gauge, and honestly, I would recommend going thinner, but this was all my local store had available during these trying times. Rare earth magnets to glue under your minis' bases. You can find adequate magnets on Amazon. I prefer 6x2mm. They have a good pull and sit underneath bases nicely. Some foam board. This is Ready Board, which I picked up from the dollar store. And to work with those materials, you will need metal shears, a glue gun and glue sticks, a ruler, a knife, and some super glue to glue the magnets to your model's bases. The first step of the process is to plan out how the shelves will be constructed. Using a pen and paper is more than adequate to figure this out, which is what I did for my Slaanesh Instapot box. But to make things more visually interesting for you guys, I have constructed my plan for this box in 3D. The goal here is to understand what the interior space can afford, so you measure out your lengths and widths and decide how you want to break up the space. The most complicated part will be determining the height between shelves. Generally speaking, you don't want to divide the height evenly since vehicles and monsters can often be much larger than your standard infantry. Since the internal height of my box is 7.5 inches tall, I've decided to place my second shelf at the 4.25 inch mark, which allows for taller vehicles like venom crawlers and contemptors to have enough space. Just be sure to take into account the thickness of the foam board for the shelves too, since that is what the steel sheets will be mounted onto. You can even do some pretty nifty configurations for models which are very large, by limiting the upper shelf's length. And with the plan determined, it's time to start the cutting. Just be sure to measure twice or even thrice, since you can only cut once. When cutting the steel sheet, be mindful of any sharp edges that may be caused from the cutting process. It's not knife blade sharp, but if you are not familiar with handling this type of material, you may want to consider using some work gloves. And now to verify that it fits. Ah yeah! Once the steel sheets are done, it's time to cut the foam board bases for the required shelves. And lastly, it's time to cut the foam board support braces for those shelves, which will vary depending on your configuration, but here is the general idea. Essentially, you want to cut strips of foam board equal to the height of your shelf space. The length doesn't need to be all that long. I'm using 1/2-inch strips, and the layout of these struts doesn't need to be 1-to-1 the same as what I have here. Really, you just need to make sure your shelf will be supported. Since my configuration only has one shelf, I'm planning to fit it with some handles instead. But if you have multiple shelves, carry through the same philosophy so each shelf is supported. Now with everything cut, the gluing can begin. As mentioned for this, I'll be using hot glue. It's inexpensive and it's a breeze to work with since there's virtually no drying time. Also, it works excellently with card and foam board, and I was actually quite surprised with how well it works with the steel surface. So with the glue gun nice and hot, I'll place a few dollops of glue on the bottom of the box to attach the steel sheet. And in a few seconds it's fixed. The magnet base of the box is now in place. Next, it's time to glue the shelves. Ideally, you want to size the metal so its position is inset relative to the foam shelf base. I actually failed to position mine in that manner here, but it's not that big of a deal since I'm going to be putting handles on this top shelf. This is then followed up by gluing the support struts. In addition to supporting the shelves, gluing these in will strengthen our box's integrity. And since my configuration only has one shelf, rather than adding more struts to support a subsequent shelf, I will glue in those handles I mentioned earlier. Obviously, if you have multiple shelves like with my Slanesh Instapot box, don't glue the support struts to the walls of your box. And that's pretty much it. The system is working. It'll store models and hold them in place during transport. Wait, hold up. One final note. That is, to trace the line border of the steel sheet shelf with some hot glue, in the event the edges are sharp. And on my box in particular, I will apply some hot glue to where the handles take stress, which should help extend their durability. That's a wrap on this one. Thanks for watching. So now you guys know how I build my army storage and transport solutions, and why I think they are a pretty good alternative to the conventional options available. I hope you found this video enjoyable and interesting, and if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, there is a like button, and if you want to help this channel grow, there is a subscribe button. There's also a bell button and a share button, so press the buttons you want to press. Thanks again for watching, and I will hope to see you guys in the next one.
Treat your cardboard box with care. Take care of the box, and it'll take care of you. Don't think of it as just another box. Treat it with love. Don't be rough, okay?